I'm Lise Cartwright, and I just wanted to say hi before you jump straight into the workshop. I am what I would definitely class a productive author, and I'm excited to share with you some little tips and tricks I learned from the challenge that I did called 7 Books in 7 Weeks. I hope you enjoy, and if you have any questions at all, you can shoot me an email, lise@hustleandgroove.com. Hi there, welcome to my workshop, which is called The Productive Author, and how to write 7 books in 7 weeks without going crazy. And who am I? I am Lise Cartwright. I am a full-time author and full-time author coach. I was born in New Zealand and I'm married an Australian, and the reason that I mention that is because between the two countries, we can be quite competitive, particularly from a sports perspective. So if you're from Ireland or the UK and you've married an Irish person or a British person, then you'll understand what I'm saying. The same goes for if you're Canadian, American, and you're married either way. You'll understand what that's like. And my husband and I love to travel. We have been to lots of places, and we've still got a few more places to tick off, with Canada being one of our favorite places in the world. And a little bit more about me. I quit my job in 2012. I was working as an administrator at the time, overseeing a program for rural doctors coming into Australia. So I really just say that because I don't have any background in writing at all. It's certainly not a degree that I've ever held. So I just wanted to put that right out there. And I quit my job to go full-time as a freelance writer. And then in 2015, I switched from being a freelance writer to a full-time author. And then in 2016, I diversified into being not just a full-time author, but also an author coach, because for me, it was about giving back and helping other authors put on their business hat and make money doing this versus just publishing a book to crickets, which is definitely something I have experienced. So I really just wanted to set the stage and just let you know where I'm from, where I'm at, and then just really want to talk to you about this crazy challenge that I set myself back in 2015. And it was all about writing 7 books in 7 weeks. Now, you might be wondering why I even came up with this idea. And basically what happened was I learned how to become a self-published author in 2014, and that was towards the end of that year. So by the time I was sitting down to do my goals for 2015, I had written 3 books, and I knew that this was something that I wanted to do full time. I really was passionate about it. I felt really good being able to share my own knowledge and experience with millions of people, really, because that's where Amazon kind of sits. That's their playing field, versus just being able to impact people sort of in my immediate circle of influence. So that's what I was looking at. So when I got to setting down my goals, I was sitting down in December 2014 thinking, okay, what are my plans for 2015? What does that look like? This is something that I do every year, but now I've got an even more detailed process so that I'm making sure that I'm not just setting New Year's resolutions, I'm setting actionable goals that I can actually take action towards. No pie in the sky things here. So when I was sitting down doing those goals, I remember seeing something come through my email about another author who was doing 35 books in 35 weeks, and she was in the middle of that process. And I thought to myself, that is something really cool, really different. I'm not sure that I'm going to be able to do that, but how could I do something similar? And that's how I landed on 7 books in 7 weeks. Now, I will say that to go through this process, I had to do a bit of planning. So I didn't just go, okay, I'm going to write 7 books in 7 weeks and then that's it. And then I just sat down and wrote them. Not at all. If you're going to do something like this, you definitely need to have a plan. So when I sort of set myself that goal, I set aside the dates that I was thinking about, and I think it was about mid-January that I decided to start it. I reached out to my editor and I reached out to my cover designer because I knew I needed to have both of those people on board if I was going to be doing this. So what I mean by 7 books in 7 weeks, for me, my challenge that I set myself was to write, publish, and launch a book every week for 7 weeks. So that's what I had set myself to do. Now, I just want to provide a slight caveat here that just because you write a book quickly doesn't mean that the book is not high quality. So that's why I had my editor on board. And I had already been writing for quite some time as a freelance writer, so my writing skill base was fairly well developed. And having already written 3 books and published them and gone through that process, I knew sort of, the writing process from that perspective. So I just want to put that out there because I know that definitely the sort of norm or what most people think, and particularly if you're an editor listening to this, I have got definitely a lot of flack from some editors who have said, made the comment of, gosh, if you're writing that quickly, it's not great quality. And all I would say to that is, you can't make that determination until you've actually read the book. So I would definitely recommend not making that judgment until you've actually read someone's book. So anybody that has a really fast production schedule from this perspective, always make sure that before you pass judgment or pass comment, that you actually read their book. Because the reality is that if you are doing this full time, you have the ability to sit your butt in a chair for 8 hours a day if you chose to. And I don't know about you, but my ability to type is fast. So I type about 1,500 to 2,000 words an hour. So that doesn't take long for a book to really come to life. And particularly if you're writing on a topic that you know something about, or you've had a story percolating in your mind for a while, the process of sitting down and just physically just allowing it just to come out as you type is actually, super fun. So that was my challenge, was to go through this process and write, publish, and launch a book in 7 weeks. So I'm going to talk a bit more about how I did that and what I learned in the process as we go through this workshop. So that one thing that kind of allowed me to go through this process was this quote by Sheryl Sandberg. She is someone that I love. And her quote was, "Done is better than perfect." This is my writing mantra. It's something that I've always kind of focused on because we cannot be perfect. We're human beings. Nothing can be perfect, even when you go through an editing process. So you might, I have a friend who's an author who writes fiction, and when he first started, used to have 3 editors go through his book, spending 3 to 4K, and then still finding typos, still finding things that those 3 people had missed, plus himself, plus his beta readers. So you can never have anything 100% perfect. And I think once I realized that, it actually allowed me to write faster because I wasn't really concerned with having to make everything perfect. Now, again, I'm not saying that that means that what I put out is not quality. It's just that from this perspective, I'm always focusing on that the process of, the 80-20 rule. So it means that I'm making sure that that 80% is good enough, and then not worrying about the 20% that might not quite be there. So I would encourage you to think about this when you're going through the process of writing a book, is just remembering that done is better than perfect. You can make changes. This is a great thing about being a self-published author, is that you can make changes as often as you want, because you can upload a new manuscript to Kindle, you can upload a new manuscript to CreateSpace, and it updates. So just remember that, that you have that control, you have that ability to make things to change them as you go. Nothing is set in stone. I'm going to share with you the system that I basically use, and it's really, for being a productive author, it's about systems and working those systems. So creating a system that works for you, and that working and adjusting and tweaking that system as you go. But it's also about having a schedule in place. And I know a lot of people don't like to have schedules. And what I will say to that is that you don't have to have everything set in stone, but you need to have something that works for you. So if you're not sure what that looks like, I would encourage you to try a bunch of different systems, a bunch of different schedules, and see what fits in with you. For me, I schedule everything, and I mean everything, from everything to do personally. I schedule downtime. If it's not in my calendar, then it generally doesn't happen, because I have so much going on. I like to just have everything in my calendar. Then I don't have to have the brain space to think about it. I don't have to remember things because I've already written it down. So that's what works for me. But bottom line, I always am, when I'm going through this process, it's about having fun. So if I'm not having fun at any point in this process, then I know that maybe this isn't the book project that I should be working on. And if at any point in the future that I decide that being a full-time author just isn't fun anymore, then I will look to do something else. But that's basically what I'm always making sure is that I have a system, that I've got it all scheduled in, and that the bottom line is that I'm having fun. So how do you write a book a month? So this is basically what my production schedule is, definitely for the rest of this year, and it definitely was for 2015. I wrote a book a month after I'd done my 7 books in 7 weeks challenge. 2016, some things happened and I only wrote, in fact, 2016, I didn't write any books. 2017, I kind of got my groove back on a little bit and I wrote 3 books. And then this year I'm back to writing more consistently. So this is my process, is that generally I aim to write a new book every 4 to 6 weeks. And the three things that really matter to help to make that happen is butt and chair. Because if your butt's not in the chair, then you're not able to write. Having that system and then following that system. So here's what that looks like, and I'm excited to share with you guys what that looks like. And I'll just warn you, this might be slightly overwhelming, but let me step you through it, and don't worry, I've got a little secret sauce for you after we've gone through this process. The book a month system. So I know that this looks like a lot. This is my productivity schedule, and obviously there's some slight flexibility in here, but I just really want to share with you what this kind of looks like. So briefly, the first 7 days are really about the mind mapping, outlining, and using Scrivener to set everything up. So if you're not familiar with Scrivener, it is an amazing writing tool. It's designed for authors. It allows you to visually see your book come to life. But one of the really great things about it that I love the most is that I can move things around without it stuffing anything up. So if you're familiar with writing in something like Microsoft Word, which is not designed to be a book publishing program, but if you've been writing in Microsoft Word for any length of time and you're working on your manuscript and then you decide that a chapter needs to be moved, that is a really painful process. I was writing in Microsoft Word when I first started, and I used to write all my individual chapters in individual Word documents. That is also super painful when you get to the end and you try to combine the whole lot and then you hand it off to an editor. So just, if you haven't tried Scrivener, I definitely recommend checking it out. So I will do my mind mapping, my outlining, and then moving my outline into Scrivener, adding all my research into Scrivener, and then sort of setting up my project targets, which are word count. So whilst I don't necessarily focus on a word count, I do have something as a starting point so that I've got something to kind of work towards. So I generally pick between 15,000 to 20,000 words as sort of my initial word count, and then where the book lands is where it lands. I'm not really too concerned about that. It's just so that I can track my writing, track and see how I'm going over that sort of writing process. The really great thing about Scrivener is that you can set writing session targets. So if you were wanting to try and figure out how many words per hour you were writing, Scrivener would be able to help you do that. And then I also set a first draft deadline. So I'm definitely, I'm all about scheduling, so I'm definitely going to have a deadline. And I set a deadline and then I work backwards in terms of knowing how much time I need to spend a day writing, because I'm definitely not someone that likes to sit in front of a computer for 8 hours a day and type. I can if I need to, but I would prefer not to do that. So for me, it's about setting that initial word count, figuring out what my draft deadline is going to be, and then working backwards and figuring out how many words per day I need to be typing. And then knowing that if I miss a day, I'm going to have to make that up somewhere along the line. So it's just really about holding yourself accountable. And yes, I could move that deadline if I wanted to, but I always write it down in my calendar. I tell my husband. And when I first started, I had also an accountability partner as well. So I would also let them know. Now I'm pretty self-motivated and I stick to those deadlines. And then obviously day 7, I start the writing process. So normally a book would take me about 2 to 3 weeks to write. And like I said, I'm creating that writing schedule. And then I would complete that first draft. And then I would enter into my self-editing phase. So we are here, days 9 to 14, self-editing phase. So what that looks like is the first pass, I will print the entire book out, and I'll print it out single page so that I can make notes, and if I need to, write them on the back of that. If you're going to do this, just make sure that you number your pages, because if you start moving stuff around and you haven't numbered your pages, it is a pain in the butt. So I print it off, grab a red pen. I'm totally fine with doing that, and I will verbally read through my book. So I will read it out loud. And the reason that I do that is because I can really catch difficult sentence structures and words that just don't flow. And if you struggle over anything when you're speaking it, people reading it are going to struggle with it even more. So really great way to do that. The other thing about printing it out is that if you need to move things around, I like to grab some scissors and just cut that stuff up so that I can cut it, move it to where it needs to be. And then when I go back to Scrivener, I can just move it around. It's not, again, it's just super simple. And then, so that's my second draft. And then my third draft, I will run through the Hemingway app. This app is amazing. It's free. You can use it in your browser. You can also download it. I think it's about $19 to download onto your computer, but you can totally use it in your browser. What the Hemingway app does is it will tighten up your writing. So the great thing about this is that it also gives you a grade level. So it's at a reading comprehension level. So Hemingway said that to be able to serve your audience, or to serve the masses, for the most people to understand what you're writing, you want to be aiming for a grade 10 or less comprehension level. So when I first started writing and when I first started using the Hemingway app, I was at about a grade 12. So I knew that I needed to tighten things up. And what the Hemingway app does is it will tell you if you've got difficult to read sentences. It color codes everything. Hard to read sentences, it will tell you if you're using too much passive voice. It will tell you if you've used too many verbs, adjectives, plus spelling and stuff like that. So you can go in, and I just do chapter by chapter. So just copy and paste and just work your way through, and then obviously paste it back into Scrivener or whatever it is that you're using. So that is my third draft. And at this point, I'm now ready to hand it off to my editor. I will not go through 50 million times. Remember, done is better than perfect. And I've done 2 passes already. So I know that at this point, if I go back through it again, it's just going to be super uncomfortable. So at this point, I would hand it over to my editor. Now that process can take, 2 to 3 days, maybe an entire week, depending on her schedule. But I have basically blocked time off every month for her to be able to edit whatever I send her. So she knows what that process is like, and she does it inside Scrivener for me. So that's another thing, is finding an editor that will work with you in whatever program you're using. So she's amazing. She was able to work with me inside Scrivener, and editing inside Scrivener isn't too different from using something like Microsoft, where we can kind of track changes. The great thing about Scrivener is that you can take like these snapshots so that you can basically back up your document and then compare it to what your editor has done, so you can quickly see where changes have made. But it also, any changes that she makes are in red, so I can easily see where those are. She can make comments, all those sorts of things. So yeah, handing it off to the editor to do editing is really just handing over the Scrivener file. And from that point forward, it's really, while she has got the document, I'm then now moving into choosing a title and subtitle and working with my cover designer. Again, I've got time in his calendar as well to be able to go through that process. And then really it's just moving into sort of pre-launch phase, where I'm connecting with my launch team, letting them know the launch date. And that might be maybe 2 or 3 weeks after my actual publication date. So it's not always, the book's done and then I move straight into a launch. I plan that out. So then it's just all the other bits and pieces that go into creating a book and self-publishing it. So creating social media images, formatting for Create Space, obviously once it's back from the editor, sending that out as a PDF copy to the launch team, ordering the physical proofs, all those sorts of things. So it's all about making sure that all of that stuff is done. So generally that process that you see right in front of you typically takes about 30 days. Now, what I will say to this is sometimes life happens and you have to be flexible with that happening. So that's why my launch date is never the week after I've gone through this process. I normally push my launch date out to be 2 to 3 weeks later, particularly if something happens and I'm running slightly behind from a scheduling and productivity perspective. So once the actual book is back from the editor, if anything needs to be delayed, then that's generally at the point that it gets delayed. So that is basically the book a month system. So this is the writing and publishing side of things. The launch side of things is definitely separate, and I have a different process for that. I don't have enough time to kind of go over that in this workshop, but just know that the launch process is different and I have another system in place for that. But this is definitely enough to kind of get you guys going. So what do you think this looked like for my 7 books in 7 weeks challenge? Let me share what that looked like. So if you're thinking that this is a lot, you're going to freak out when you see this one. So this is what it looked like during my 7-day my 7 books in 7 weeks challenge. So day 1, remember, so I had planned this out. So before I sat down to do this, I already knew what 7 books I was going to be writing. So I had already done a mind map and I already had sort of an outline before I started this entire process. So I already knew the topics that I was kind of going down. So day 1, I just refined my mind map, refined my outline, and then set everything up in Scrivener. So all those word targets and all those sorts of stuff, set my first draft deadline, which you'll see is very, very quick. So day 2, I wrote that first draft. So this was very much about button chair for 8 hours straight. I had a couple of breaks in there, but generally I was just sitting there just writing. So the books that I wrote were all about how to be a successful freelancer and all the bits and pieces that go into setting up a freelancing business. So I just wrote those down. So the books range from 10,000 words being the smallest up to 20,000 words being the biggest. So they were in that sort of range. So that was day 2, was just all about getting that first draft done. And I did not step away from my computer until that first draft was done. And then I went into my self-editing process on day 3. So I did the print off, red pen, back into Scrivener, then going through the Hemingway app. I did that all in one day. So 1 bit in the morning, having a break, and then 1 bit in the afternoon, with the view that at the end of day 3, I was handing it off to the editor to start editing, because we worked on different sides of the world. So it was great. I could literally go to sleep knowing that my editor was going to be editing while I was asleep. So on day 4, I'd already handed the draft off to the editor. So she was getting that back to me at the end of day 4. Day 5 was all about, so day 4 and day 5 was all about choosing a title, subtitle, and getting the cover design. So that was a 24-hour process. Day 6 was about formatting the book and uploading it to Kindle and Create Space at the same time. So I was doing both and not getting a physical proof of the actual paperback. So I was just doing a digital version of that. And then day 7, obviously hitting publish on those books. And then I was moving into launch. So the first 3 books, well, the first 2 books, I definitely did the write, publish, launch. But by the time I got to that 3rd book, it was just getting too much to launch. And it's, that I'll talk about that a little bit further on. But launching and writing and publishing all kind of at the same time and overlapping that is super, super difficult to keep on top of everything, really, because the writing and publishing phase is one phase and then the launching phase is another phase. So I definitely like to keep them separate. So by the time I got to this, to the 3rd book, I definitely decided that I was just going to write and publish the books for the remainder of that challenge. and then launch them all at the end. So I realize that what I've just shared with you is a lot of information. And so a couple of things that you can really make a system work for you, and definitely what have helped me, is to really focus on, in the beginning, mind mapping your idea to unlock all the knowledge that you have about the topic, or if you're writing a fiction book, to just unlock everything that's kind of going around inside your head. And I will mind map until nothing else is coming out. And then I will step away for about 24 hours. Like, I won't look at the mind map. I'll leave it for 24 hours, and then I'll come back to it and maybe spend another 30 minutes on it, just adding anything else to it before I move into the outline phase. And then when I'm talking about an outline, it's really just a brief outline. And generally my outline is only a page long, maybe 2 tops. And it's really just capturing all the similar ideas that you have on your mind map into what you feel might be sections of your book. Now, again, nothing is set in stone at this point. Things may move around, but it just helps for my writing process to have something to kind of sit down and start with. So I definitely don't suffer from writer's block at this point, because I'm removing that by not sitting down staring at a blank page when I start to write, because I've already got an outline. So my outline will basically be maybe a chapter heading and then 3 to 5 bullet points about what I want to cover in that chapter or in that section. And I'll do that as much as I need to kind of flesh out the book and the structure of how I'm going to write that. Then I'll kind of create a summary for each chapter, like I said, sort of using bullet points. Sometimes I'll do even more, like the 5 to 10 bullet points, just whatever I need to do to capture everything that I think I'm going to need to cover. So at this point, nothing is set in stone. I know I keep saying that, but at this point, it's really just about figuring, a starting point, just really allowing me to be able to sit down and just start writing. And then things will continue to evolve from there. Once you've got a writing process down and you're doing this all the time, your writing is just going to improve, and your ability to create your outlines, create your mind maps is just going to improve the more and more you do it. And then one of the biggest things for me that I learned, particularly when I went through the 7 books in 7 weeks challenge, was to write what you know first. So I don't necessarily always start writing a book from chapter 1 all the way through. I don't necessarily follow it in sequential order. When I did the 7 books in 7 weeks, for me, it was about getting some quick wins on the board as far as my brain was concerned, because I knew this was going to be a challenge just to sit down and write for 8 hours straight. So I thought, you know what, let's make this process easier on myself and write what I know first. Write what's the easiest. What comes to mind the easiest is what I'm going to write first. And that's exactly what I did. So that may have been chapter 1, but it could have also been chapter 3, or it could have been the last chapter. It was just whatever works for you. And this is why, again, I just love Scrivener, because you can do that and you can move things around. So even though I might have started off with chapter 3, it didn't matter, because I could just restructure it and jig everything around to make it into what I needed it to look like. So here's an example of a mind map. So this was the mind map from my very first book, No Gym Needed. As you can see, I just called it quick exercises, and it's really just a brain dump of everything that I had at the time. And you'll see, I'm not sure if you can really hone in on that, but there is under gym quick exercises, it says no gym workout. So that was kind of my working title. And the title was something that I was really focused on and really thought the book was going to be called that. But as you know, No Gym Needed is just a lot easier to talk about. So that's what I mean about a mind map. It doesn't need to be pretty. It's really just a brain dump of everything that you're kind of thinking about. And then in terms of what the outline looks like in Scrivener, this is why I love Scrivener. So this is called the corkboard view. And basically it is just a corkboard with 6x5 cards on it. And what I'll do at this point is just put my initial chapters, titles, And then I'll put in those bullet points. And I can see those when I move into the writing phase, where out to the right-hand side, it will pop out these little bullet points and notes that I've put here. So again, this is why I love Scrivener. And you can choose color, you can color code things. Red means still needs to be done. Orange means in first draft. So Scrivener is amazing. And this is how I am able to write fast or get this productivity system down, is because of the tools that I use. Now, I know this looks like a juggling act, and it is a lot, and trying to keep on top of this is definitely hard. It is not easy, but if you set a system up, it will make your life a lot easier. And then if you have a system in place, then what I would definitely recommend is sharing it with your editor, cover designer, and formatter and VA if you've got a virtual assistant, whoever you've kind of got helping you. And if you don't have anyone helping you right now, setting the system up is only going to allow those people to help you in the future. Now, I'm definitely not special. I don't have this amazing memory to keep track of everything, but what I do have is a project management tool that makes it all happen without me really having to think about. So everything that I covered previously, you know, day 1 right through to day 30, I have got set up in this amazing thing called Trello. Now, Trello can be used for so many different things. And I first thought about using Trello because I have been using it to manage my freelance clients. So I had started sort of thinking, how could I use this to manage my book production system? Like, how could that work? So what I want to show you guys, rather than me just talking at you guys like this, I'm going to share with you my actual Trello board and step you through what that looks like. So bear with me as I switch screens and show you Trello. And here we are inside Trello. So what I love about Trello is that, again, it's a visual representation of a system. So Trello is free. It allows you to change the background. Like you can see here, I've got a laptop with some coffee and some note pads. So this is a background that I've chosen. So you can do a few different things, but basically what I do with my system is split it up into 3 different phases. So I have the writing phase, which is here, the publishing phase, and then the launch phase. And you can basically transfer what I had written, shown you previously, into here. And you can do it by day, you could do it by week. It's really about figuring out what works for you. For me, I'm definitely about setting days, and I love setting dates. So what I do here is I always start with this system, and then I just copy it and just create one for each book that I do. So what I would do is come in here and I would put down my initial book topic and initial thoughts. I would just type that straight into here. If I had a VA that was going to be doing some research for me, I would probably tag her in at this point. So you can share a board with people, you can invite people, and that's when you can basically add or assign this to somebody. So at the moment, this is only assigned to me. But then what I would do is come in here and be like, okay, this is still something that needs to be done. And then I might tag this for my VA if there was something that I needed her to do. And then I would probably create a checklist for her as well. And just be like research, next blog post idea, something along, you know, whatever it was that you needed help with, this is where I would put it. I would also add a due date. So this is day 1. So really the due date is going to be for my VA more than anything. So I'm going to hit save. And then you can see that visually, now I can see that this is something that needs to be done. And I've also added my VA to it. So day 2 we talked about was outline. So I would include the outline here, and I would probably just do an initial capture of that from the mind map, and then I would move straight into Scrivener. I wouldn't need too much more to sort of hang out here. Again, when I'm setting this up, all of this is going to be to do until I sort of go through and make the note that it's done. So you can edit any of these labels, and I'm just going to say that this is completed. So that when you hit this and then you would untag that, then it would show that that is now completed. I could choose to add a due date, but really this is for me, and I know that this process is not going to take too long. So again, here's that research again. So you might decide that this is going to be your VA again, and you would maybe add in this area here where it says description. You might add a whole bunch of stuff in there, or you might choose to create a checklist like I did on day one. Again, you would choose a due date, and then once you'd had sort of ticked that off, you would tick that off, and that would show as being completed. So you can do it two ways. You could set a due date for every single card in here, or you can choose to assign a label so that you're switching in between. It's really up to you. It's about figuring out what works best for you. But why I like Trello is that it keeps track of everything all in the one place. So it emails me when someone comments on something, if someone uploads things, because that's the other thing, you can upload documents in here. So it's just one central point to keep track of everything related to this particular book. And once a book is done, I keep these boards so that I can go back and just see how I can refine the process for the next book. And then at the end of the year, I would probably archive the boards, particularly if I wasn't planning to write any more books in a series. So if this was a series, then I'd probably actually keep the series all on one board. And then what that might look like is I would probably create book one, and then what I would do is separate it out like this, so that you can see how that might look. And then I might have book two, and I would do the same thing. Writing phase, publishing phase. And then what I would do is move all of those other things in here, and I would create a checklist for myself to sort of go through that. So you can kind of see how you can condense it further depending on how you want this to work for you. So this is if you were doing a series. So I'm just going to archive both of those. But for now, let's come back to what we would do if we were just doing a single book. So research, again, probably going to get, if you've got a VA, you might get them to do it. You might add in a whole bunch of blog posts, articles, URLs, whatever it is that you need them to go and check out and get further information from. From here, I would be setting up my project targets, and I would probably set this as a due date for myself, and I'd set the actual due date to be my first draft deadline for this, so that it was always on my calendar, and something that would remind me as well that, it's due today, if I haven't already sort of finished it. So I would come in here, choose word counts, choose my writing session counts and my chapter word count, really just as a place to track this stuff going forward so that I can see where I land. And then once the book was actually done, I would come in here and go I would add in what those actual were. So I would go real actual counts. And that would be final word count. And then I go average writing session word counts, and then same with the chapter. Really just to see where I'm at for each book. It's good to be able to track this sort of stuff so that you know how close you are from what you kind of set out as your original word counts as to what it actually landed on. It's just really good to track this stuff, because what you don't track, you can't measure. And it's just really good to see what your average book size is. So I know how I landed on the 20,000 words. That's generally my average word count for a book that I'm writing about. So that's how I kind of landed on that. And again, you might choose to set that up. Really, it's just about labeling things how you want your project to look. I would also come in here and set up my writing schedule so that I know what I'm meant to be doing on a daily basis. And I would probably set a due date that aligns with that final first draft as well, so that I had 2 points in my system where I knew that that was happening. And then basically, obviously the writing schedule, that is going to next I just move straight into writing. I don't need to include that here. But then once I'm at the editing phase, I'm talking about self-editing and moving that off to an editor. So I might come in here and tag my editor so that they know, and obviously I'd probably add them to this actual card. Set a due date for that so that they know when they need to do it. I'd probably also create a checklist specifically for them so that they could come in and tick off when they've received it and then when they're finished editing inside Scrivener. So that is how I would manage the writing phase. The publishing phase, very similar. Whoever needs to be involved, obviously the cover designer, that is going to be my cover designer. So I'm just going to come in here and edit that so that I know that that's who that belongs to, and obviously that is to do. And then I'd add a due date. I might add in some links to some books that I've seen on Amazon that I would want him to kind of emulate or that I really like. Sometimes I don't do that. Sometimes I just give him a synopsis of the book, like the summary, the title and subtitle, and then just let him come up with whatever he comes up with. But we've been working together for a while, so he knows the types that I like, and I also trust him because he's done an amazing job. So it's about building your own teams where possible and linking them up with you. So again, I would definitely set a due date for this that I wanted that to be done by. So I'm actually just going to read. And that will also email him. So as long as I have added him as a member to this card, then he will be notified as soon as I add him to this. So that he knows. And you can choose to watch this card as well, but because this is your board originally, you will be notified of anything that is coming your way, if anyone adds anything to this or updates or anything like that. So when I'm setting up my initial book system, so when I'm coming in here and setting up due dates and stuff like that, when I get to this point, I will add in some inspiration from other books so that I've got an idea of how I might like to format this. So when it comes to the Kindle version, I keep that very simple. I don't really worry too much about the formatting, but the paperback, depending on the book genre or the book topic, I will definitely come in here and add any screenshots or images that I've got of different books. And then really it's just about setting due dates for all these different areas. I would come in here and set up to-dos, label it as to be done. If I needed help with anything, I would definitely add my VA in here. Really at this point, no one else is going to be involved. And then my launch phase is, entering details about my launch team, what I'm going to do on social media, and then sort of all the book promotion. What does that look like? So having this all in one place allows me to be able to see where I'm at and what needs to be done and who's doing what at which point. The other great thing about Trello is that you can do these things called a power up. Now they normally, depending on what version of Trello you're using in terms of whether it's a paid or a free, you get at least one free power up, and I've chosen to add the calendar power up. So what that means is that I can then switch to a calendar view, and you can also add this calendar to your own Google Calendar. So remember how I said I'm all about scheduling stuff in? So I have a Google Calendar that is color coded based on all the different calendars that I have adding to that. So I have a whole bunch of obviously book projects, and I add them to my Google Calendar. Now to be able to do that, just simply Google how to add my Trello project to my Google Calendar, and you will find there is a Trello blog post on how to connect those two. It's very simple to do, but it allows you to see kind of where you're at and maps out your actual writing, publishing, and launch process. So that is how I use Trello to manage my entire book project system. So I hope you can see just how powerful Trello is. And it doesn't have to be Trello. It's just about finding what works for you. So other options are Asana, Basecamp is another one, or you could simply manage this inside a Google spreadsheet or an Excel spreadsheet. It's really about finding what works for you. So the other thing I just really wanted to touch on was the tools that I've kind of mentioned throughout this workshop is Scrivener for writing. You just have to give it a try if you haven't. The Hemingway app, honestly, this is probably the best thing since sliced bread as far as I'm concerned, being a writer. Grammarly, if you haven't used this, definitely get it installed. You can have it in your browser. Once it's in there, it's also an application for your computer, and it basically makes sure that your grammar is correct. Trello, I've already talked about. The other thing I wanted to touch on was KDP Rocket, which is what I use for keywords and category identification. It's amazing, and if you're going to be publishing books on a consistent basis, I would definitely recommend checking it out. KD Spy is something else that I use from a category perspective. It gives you a quick view of whether a category is going to be super competitive and whether it's popular, and whether you'll be able to rank basically in that category. So definitely something to look at. And KD ROI is another Chrome browser plugin that allows you to, once your book is published on Amazon, you can click on the Chrome browser plugin, and what it will do is submit your book to the free sites, promotional sites. So whether it's a free promotion or a 99-cent promotion, it does it all for you. You just have to fill in a few things. So it pulls all the details from Amazon and then allows you to submit. It's about 30 different book promotion sites. So, and this is just at the free level. It's not at the paid level. Just a really quick way of staggering out your launch side of things. The one thing that I learned from going through this process of doing 7 books in 7 weeks was that I couldn't effectively write, publish, and launch a book every 7 days. So that's what I'm talking about here when I say only work on one writing book project at a time. You can only do that effectively. Multitasking is a myth. You can multitask, but you cannot do things effectively because you're basically juggling. So focus on one project at a time, finish it, and then start the next phase, whether that's a launch phase or whether you're choosing not to launch that book at that time. It was definitely too hard, and like I said, by book 3, I'd learned the hard way that it was just not a good idea to write, publish, and launch all in the space of 7 days. So that's why I decided to just write and publish, and then I did a big launch of all 7 books at the end of the challenge. And keeping your launch process separate is key to not going insane through this whole process. Thank you so much for spending this time with me and allowing me to pop into your computer. And I hope you've learned how simple it is to be productive. It's not easy, but it is simple if you just create a system that works for you and you follow it and tweak it as you go. Sticking to a schedule is key, blocking off time is key, and it will definitely happen. It's all about that consistency. And I wanted to say, as a big thank you for being here, I want to encourage you to visit this link, which is hustleandgroove.com/Ali workshop. I want to give you some special gifts, and one of them is access to my Trello productivity board, so you'll be able to copy that and use that for yourself. You're welcome. And also some really cool other goodies, including my latest book, I Am an Author, which kind of details a little bit more about my production and how I'm able to be as productive as I am. And it touches a bit more on validation and using this thing that I call the discovery method. So if you're interested, you can definitely grab your own copy of that at this link. And if you want to connect with me more, you're more than welcome to just head on over to hustleandgroove.com and say hello. I really appreciate it. So thank you once again. I'm Lise Cartwright, and I look forward to hearing how your production schedule goes for being a full-time author. Take care.